So just very quickly to introduce the two co-hosts here, we've got Ton Wilson, president of Entellect LLC. She is a hands-on strategist with over 20 years of federal contract capture and bid expertise. She builds and executes winning strategies that help clients secure even the most complex contracts. And as a trusted bid strategist, GovCon speaker, and podcast host,
I'm
she
really
empowers
sad. My mom's super sad.
Sorry, can everyone put it on mute, please? Thank you so much. So as a trusted bid strategist, GovCon speaker, and podcast host, which if you haven't checked out her podcast yet, make sure you do. Ton's 2 cents. Highly useful information there. She empowers small businesses to navigate and compete effectively in the federal marketplace. And of course, from FedSavvy Strategies, we have Brian Lindholm, founder and managing principal of FedSavvy Strategies, who uses his over 20 years of experience and many hundreds of black hat reviews at this point to bring deep expertise in competitive intelligence and capture strategy. He's known for his comprehensive black hat reviews, which he's done hundreds of at this point, and actionable insights. And he has successfully helped clients win billions of dollars in federal contracts. So please welcome our two co-hosts, and I will hand the conversation over. Please do keep your sound on mute and your mic on mute, but do feel free to add questions to the chat, and we will get to those during the Q&A section. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Meg. Appreciate that introduction. Welcome, everyone. We're both Tom and I are thrilled to have you here. Really appreciate this, and hopefully this will be not just interesting and informative, but also maybe a little entertaining as Tom and I banter back and forth on all things GovCon, capture strategy, and how to win as the incumbent and how to beat those pesky incumbents. So we're very excited to bring this to you. We've had a lot of good dialogue planning for this webinar, so we're very excited to bring this to you. So let's just jump in, right? So I got to give Tan a shout out here. It was her idea to invoke Sun Tzu, which I thought was frankly brilliant, honestly, to bring that in, because I mean it's the art of war, right? The art of war, but we're in the art of war for money. Let's just call it what it is, right? That's what we're doing, guys. We're doing the art of war for money, for contracts, and to help these businesses succeed and help your business succeed. So that's what we do. So Tom, you want to? I think this was your theme, so I'm going to give you due credit. How would you introduce this, right? What aspect of Sun Tzu would you want to invoke here to set the table here appropriately?
I thank you for that introduction, Meg, and Brian for co-hosting this with me. But it's still, I think it's just something that kind of evolves. And because we work with our clients all the time on defending their incumbency or unseating an incumbent, I see everything as a war. And so like I'm preparing to go to war. And so it's nothing personal. I say that all the time. It's nothing personal. It's just business. And so, we can be kind, we can be civil, we can be nice to each other, but it's all out war. And so I just thought when we were talking about incumbencies, and here's the thing, is that this is not like there are going to be things here in our discussion that you're like, yeah, I get it. Yes, I've heard this before, like whatever, right? So I think there are foundational basis types of information that we'll kind of share. But at the end of the day, it's how do you present yourself and how are you going to kind of attack the next opportunity from a competitive perspective. And so we're going to give you some really good insights on how to kind of prepare yourself to go to war and what does that kind of look like. So it's going to be fun.
Right. And this is looking at both sides of the coin, because we're going to talk about, as the incumbent, what maybe are the advantages that you have, but then we're going to focus a little bit more of our time. Playing defense is not always very fun. I prefer to play offense. So let's go on offense and go on the attack. So it's then how do you get down to those pesky incumbents? So this is the battlefield, right? This is what we're going to talk about, the battlefield itself, and focus on what we would collectively call the incumbent's edge. And then Tom and I, when we discussed this a lot, of what are some of the inherent advantages of being the incumbent. So let's hit on those a bit more. So I mean, there are really a couple here that are what might be some, yes, obvious strength of the incumbent, that may be true. But the incumbent has some inherent advantages that are going to be hard to match, or at least you have to work hard to begin to neutralize, right? So this is the reputation and relationship they have. Them being inside that customer for what could be 3, 4, or 5 years, or maybe 10 years, maybe 15 years, they've established those relationships and rapport with the decision makers. They've gained, in many cases, they've gained their trust. And that is important because in the end, you're human beings making decisions. And if I don't know you, I may be less willing to trust you. The same thing in how we all do business with each other, too. Institutional knowledge, I think this is personally a big one because you know how to tailor your solution to fit the nuances of the mission and the agency, how it fits. So it's not just a cookie cutter thing for your best of breed jazz, whatever it may be. This is something you fit to the agency and make sure it is tailored to that. The past performance piece is always a thing. Now, and this is even, I don't know about you, Tom, but I've seen incumbents who even have cure notices, like several, and they still win because they are the devil that they know. And yeah, at least they know it. They had some problems, but they pulled it off. They got things done. And then also the people part, like they may have some unique people on their payroll that might have been one of the reasons why they won in the first place. I have Dr. Emil Schopenhausen, who is the world-renowned expert in fill in the blank, and the government, maybe I don't think that there's another Dr. Emil out there, or someone better than Dr. Emil Schopenhausen, or maybe someone else who just doesn't exist. So that purple squirrel, I may believe, if I lose him, I'm going to die. My mission goes to hell, right? These are some things that they have advantages. So, but Tanya, you and I were talking about this, and there was some other recent events thing that might begin to unravel a few of these advantages. But you want to hit on that? I think you had some very good points when you and I were chatting.
Yeah, here's the thing though, and this is one of the Captain Obvious slides, right? I think we all, like anybody who has ever gone up against an incumbent or has tried to, defend your incumbency, you realize, yes, these are obvious advantages. And so I think one of the key words on this slide is respect. You really do have to respect the incumbent, regardless of whether or not you think, ugh, they're morons, or oh, they've done this wrong, or whatever. Respect the fact that they have this contract. If it is a contract that has many, many years into it, they most likely won and beat someone else. And so at one point, they were you. So let's just kind of give, kudos where they are. With that said, though, this is the but, not the and statement of the slide, is that this institutional knowledge, I think, in a normal type of situation would be something that is very much a strength. But we are in, someone said to me the other day, we're in the Doge era, right? We're in the Trump Doge era. And you can't not have that be a major factor in how you look at incumbents under this environment. And so that's the one thing that I kind of want to drive home about the battlefield, is that the battlefield has evolved and is always changing. And if we know anything about this president's from his first term to this term, is that expect the unexpected. And so a lot of these things, the relationships, the reputation, yes, that's great, totally valid. But with the return to office, with the rifts, with the programs that are being, dismantled, agencies no longer, being in an existence, those could actually mean less. People are retiring, your relationships aren't there. Case in point, I'm actually working on a capture effort with a client right now, and they've been working on this capture effort for over a year. We know who's on the evaluation committee. We've been, in talking to the customer. We don't know if some of those people are going to be there. Many of them are close to retirement age. And so now, where we thought we knew where all the chess pieces were and who was in what position, they're no longer going to be there. And so I think resting on the laurels of the fact that, yes, these might be strengths, if anything, in this environment, it actually becomes less of a strength. And so I think you and I kind of talked about
I think we may have lost Ton for a moment there. So let me just pick up though with this. I mean, we're chatting. I mean, frankly, along with it, and then Tom, let me know when you get back there. I mean, you had a connection problem. So if you look at the Doge effect on this, I mean, the source
Sorry.
selection might have changed, right? Oh, there you are. So you froze for a moment there. Source selection could have changed. These people were probationary. They may have been in a probationary role. I had a friend of mine who was a probationary SES. He's gone now. He took that job and he was a guy who was a decider on contracts. But now he's gone. So like your client who the world may have changed, my benefactors who really have been my champion, they may be gone at this point, right? So they may be toast. So I'm back to, I might have someone come in who likes the other guy. Or frankly, I could care less. You've been here for 25 years. You know the mission inside and out. I don't really care anymore. Too bad. It is what it is. Like Ton had another connection issue. Oh, Ton, you there?
Yeah.
Yep, there you go.
Hey, Texas, y'all, our electrical grid here in Texas is just crazy. I apologize.
Sure.
So
That's okay.
I did hear you talking about the the advantages and the thing that I want to say about the institutional knowledge part of it is it does help. And I think that's one of the advantages, but it will only help you so much if the scope doesn't change, right?
Yes.
And so I think we're going to talk about a little bit more later in that your knowledge of your customer and your knowledge of the workforce and the pricing, it's the analogy that we're going to use is it can either be an anchor or a rudder. So you can either use that knowledge to, and use it for good and try to help you navigate some of these changes that we are not going to be able to anticipate, or use it as an anchor. And a lot of times incumbents kind of anchor themselves to that past performance or to that customer or to that scope of work and don't look forward to where that program's moving towards. So
no problem. I think as a former naval officer, your connection there gave me joy. So you put a smile on my face whenever
there
we
you
get
go.
that in there. So let's keep digging into this, and I mean, there's a lot here we could go about. I think to Todd's point, we may be in some degree of Captain Obvious, but I think we have to set that table because going back to the respect the battlefield, I agree with you 1,000%. If you don't respect your adversary, they're gonna beat you because you're not taking it seriously. You have to. This is something I know in my black hats. I beat into the heads of the participant. Listen, I don't care if you think those guys are a bunch of bums. Guess what? Let's presume that they have a gigantic stack of BMP. They can burn they can burn it as much as they need to, whatever it takes to win, and they're laser focused on this thing. That they're all in. If they don't, then my friend Darwin comes in, takes them out of the gene pool. No, I can't presume Darwin's on my side. I have to assume whether I'm the incumbent, I've got a bunch of really credible competitors or someone else coming at me, that they are absolutely out to get me and they have the ability to do so. That is key. A little bit of paranoia goes a long way.
Yeah. And I think that leads really well into our next discussion about, the incumbent and like the weaknesses and the cracks
Yes.
in their armor, right? So I think we've kind of laid the groundwork for the fact that there are really some weaknesses. We all know this, and this is the art of the war part. This is the part that I really really love is trying to find these cracks and trying to exploit them. And so the thing too about this is that incumbents can be complacent and they can be, like overly confident. They should, with mad respect. They totally do. And so they do kind of fall into this, if it ain't broke trap. But we will talk a little bit more about the fact that, yes, sometimes if it's not broke, don't fix it type of thing, right? So like that's a very, very real, very true scenario. But it's the resistance of the fact that because incumbents think they know the customer so well, that it's like, oh, well, that's not what they really want. Oh, well, that's not really what they mean, right? You get this whole we're smarter than the customer type of thing, and you kind of overlook sometimes what the customer is looking to do on this next contract, on their recompete.
Right. And those are, I think, some key points, right? And I think it's it is the fact that they do, and sometimes I think that there's almost some self-limiting behaviors for an incumbent that even if they realize that something is changing, or they know that there's been some change and the current contract and the next one will have some differences because of any number of reasons. The missions change, the agency leadership has changed, technology has changed, whatever that driver is. And a little bit of fear that I think holds them back sometimes is, well, I need to adapt too. Because they fear, I hear this all the time in black hats where, well, if we don't, if we, they'll wonder, where have we been for 4 years? Well, yeah, I get that if you've been complacent, but you also have to lean forward. And this is where there's so many examples that I've experienced firsthand, and also just looking at things like protests where the incumbent, they were leaning, I call them leaning backward, right? They're leaning into the old scope and they weren't adapting to the new one. And even evaluation criteria having changed from the previous one has caught them off guard. And this is it's a problem, right? So let's get into that. So I'm a big fan of case studies. I think these can be very informative. And this is a problem that I've experienced firsthand with clients who they were doing great, performing wonderfully well in their incumbent contract, and then they lost. And often the case when they lost is because they weren't paying attention to what the new scope was, what the new contract was. And I see this happen in protests constantly. It's maddening how that happens. And you have to be ready for those new changes. It may be subtle, it may be magnificently different. And there's an example of one, right? So this was years ago. Um, Big Blue IBM. IBM was the incumbent running CBP data center. And the thing that had changed, this was a period of radical change for CBP, is they were intentionally and very publicly going from we're going to run our own data centers, we're going to move into a hybrid commercial cloud environment. That's a big shift for an agency that has or had a gigantic data center they were running for most of their applications. So IBM was the incumbent, and Accenture came in along with the other competitors, and IBM lost. And what happened in this one is that, and this is, by the way, not IBM bashing, it's an example, folks. So it is what it is. But IBM solutioned in price for the old scope. And they got, to be quite frank, curb stomped. It was a really bad loss. Accenture wrote to the current with the new contract. They showed how they could get CBP from their old data centers into a hybrid commercial. They told them exactly what they needed to know to switch from IBM. And IBM, it was very evident their labor categories were all wrong. Their pricing was way off. They did not pay attention. So I think it might have been one thing that you mentioned earlier is, well, that's not what they really want. That's not what they really want. No, that's what they really want. And they lost, which
Yeah.
is really a shame. And the lesson being is, I'll borrow the Wayne Gretzky quote, you got to look to see where the puck is going, not where it is right now. Accenture saw where the puck was going. IBM was staring where the puck was standing still.
Well, so I'm conflicted because I don't
Okay.
show empathy very often. And I definitely don't show empathy sometimes for larger businesses, like, oh, poor IBM, right?
Sure.
But in this case, I have to really say poor IBM, because they really kind of missed the mark on something. However, their hands may have been a little strapped. So here's the challenge with being the incumbent. Yes, you've got all this great knowledge, the institution, the past performance. You probably know systems, you know them intimately. You may have even built them, different things like that. So trying to say that if we don't win this contract or if you extract us from it, the whole, like the world's going to come crumbling down, right? Like the internet is going to like stop working that day, or something. So, but and in some instances, yes, that might be the case. But when you're an incumbent, though, it is really, you're like walking this fine line by trying to introduce and say you're going to do something different than what you have been doing for the last 4, 5, 10, 20 years. Because if I were an evaluator, a new evaluator, someone new to the program, someone independent, because again, like we said, Doge era, right? Like you don't know who's going to be on the evaluation board anymore. is that uh, I would look at this and be like, well, why haven't you done this before? You're saying you're going to introduce these innovations. You're saying you're going to save us money. You're going to do it with less people. Whatever that bid strategy might have been that you're going into this recompete on, if you're, if you're the incumbent, you really do have to kind of be careful about trying to change or shake anything or be critical about the current environment because you're part of that environment, right? So you're actually, in essence, kind of setting the stage to kind of insult yourself because it's your work, it's your contract. And you
Sure.
don't want to insult your client and your customer at the same time, like, oh, your baby's ugly, right? It's like, but we made this baby together. And so it is a fine line about trying to do that. And so I think that actually becomes the biggest challenge to defending your incumbency is how do you defend an incumbency, introduce changes, introduce improvements to address the new scope or the same scope without making it look like you have somehow not met your current contracting requirements. And so it's so much easier for an outsider or from a competitor or someone who's going to, being trying to like unseat you to kind of come in and just throw everything at you and beat you like unrelentlessly from all angles because it's so easy. It's easier to kind of do that. But I would say for competitors out there who are trying to unseat an incumbent, be careful how much and how many times you tell the customer their baby's ugly, because no customer wants to kind of hear that they've been doing it wrong and that they've have totally missed the mark on things. So again, it's a fine line for both competitors and incumbents.
Yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky. I'm sure there was a heated debate discussion internal to IBM when they saw the RFP finally come out and go, "What the hell is this?" This is so. I wonder if they did that or if they knew it was coming, but they doubled down on their own solution because it was definitely a change, a radical shift for CBP. I would hope that they would have been aware of it, but who knows? Maybe to your point, they were so invested. Listen, this is what we've been doing. We got to do it.
Well,
I mean, who knows? But they bid, I think, half of what Accenture bid. It
So
was,
I think so
yeah,
I think the last point before we move to the next
sure.
slide is that it's it's reading the room, read the room, read the environment, right? Um, and I think the second bullet was what is it? Shifting away from data center into like more
Mhm.
commercial cloud. And so technology is ever evolving. You're always like always moving tech chairs. And so yeah, absolutely. You got to really kind of stay ahead of technology, kind of stay ahead of where, the customer's moving. And this is where I think incumbents and everybody, you need to understand where the administration's moving, where your customer's moving towards, trying to stay a step ahead of that, or at least stay up to date with it instead of trying to bid old technology, old solutions, things that might have worked before, but may not kind of work in this kind of environment.
Right. Definitely a costly lesson that IBM had to learn several years ago. But let's get into more. Right? We're doing the fun part here. So going deeper onto offense, right? So then this is the finding more cracks in the armor. It's that special snowflake syndrome. I love referring to. You think you're a special little snowflake? You're really not. Get over yourself. They're not that into you. And this is, I mean, I don't know about you, but I hear this in Black Hats or the engagements all the time. No one else can do this work. I go, so when you won the contract for the first time 5 years ago, what happened then? That they said the same thing about themselves as the incumbent you just beat 5 years ago or 4.5 years, whatever the time may be, that you're not that special. None of this work is so specialized that you are the only people, the only company on the planet who can do this. There is a competitor who can do the same thing or at least something comparable. So you got to accept that you're not that special. And I think I'd be curious what you experienced, but I know when I first came into this business, when I had no gray hair and a lot more hair on top of my head, that incumbents were almost unbeatable. If you beat an incumbent, it was it was cause for celebration. Have a big block party to celebrate that way you took the incumbent. Now, It's not as insurmountable a thing anymore, and I think agencies have begun to assess risk better. Decision makers are comfortable with that risk. They can digest that risk and make decisions. And they're not maybe. I think they've begun to realize that my world won't just detonate if I get rid of these guys. Not always. Sometimes you make some bad mistakes. We've seen a couple incumbents lose and then they come back. Hey, I'm back, baby. You missed
Yeah.
me, and they did that. So, what are the things have you observed, Ton, in this special snowflake syndrome problem?
Yeah, special snowflake, purple unicorn, wearing a pink tutu, rainbows, sunshines. I get it, or they're really not that into you, type of dating reference.
Yeah.
But you know, this is really kind of hard because we help defend a lot of incumbent contracts.
Mm.
And so I'm not going to go into like all of our tricks and trades of how to defend some of the contracts. But, sometimes you kind of have to use the threat of like, disaster, like, what was it? The 2000, when we moved into like 2000 was like
Oh,
where the clock's going to stop, the computers are going to stop,
yeah.
like the end of the world is
Y2K.
kind
Yeah, we're all
the
gonna
end of
die.
days type of like strategy. And so I've used that too, and that kind of really works. And so some customers really resonate with that. You can kind of introduce fear and be like, oh hey, like, by the way, we don't win this contract, I take these people, I take this with me, like whatever. Sometimes you can kind of leverage that fear of God type of thing. That works less and less nowadays. And so that's kind of a less, draconian type of, like response that you need to kind of use, is that you kind of have to put your ego aside in this. And I think the approach that a lot of contractors are using is more of a partnership type of thing, right? And so, how are you going to make that customer look good? It's all about your end customer keeping their job, not getting called up to Congress to respond to why is this program not performing, and stuff. And so it kind of goes back to like, my saying is like value over importance. And so, can you demonstrate value? To me, if you can demonstrate a really unique value to the customer and it's quantifiable and you have a proof, like you've got kudos or it's in your CPARs or whatever, then that makes you a little bit more of a special snowflake, but maybe not the special snowflake, type of offer. But yeah, this is probably one of the biggest hurdles that incumbents have and that they suffer from is the hubris of it all. Like, we cannot be beaten, and they start believing and drinking their own Kool-Aid about that. And so I think that's why it's so important to have people like you and myself and other people who, I've got no dog in this fight. I will tell you that your baby's ugly, that your bid strategy has holes in it. But wouldn't you rather hear it from me than to submit a proposal and then find out you didn't even make the competitive range, or, or that you were not even in contention? And so I think that there's a couple of things when we talk about flipping the script that you can kind of do to kind of prepare for this. But I think you have to first admit that you're not that special. And then you can go on and work on yourself.
Right. And this is, I mean, this whole pattern of thought that you and I are talking about here is trying to find that crack in the armor where there is, let's say, one thing or maybe two things that the incumbent has struggled with or hasn't maybe done, maybe not struggle, but they haven't been all that in a bag of chips. They've been okay, right? They're all right. But as we think back to all the points we've made, what's the new normal? How is the how is the scope going to change? How's the mission going to change? And then find that area where there's an overlap where you have some strengths, but the incumbent may have some weaknesses. I know, I'm sure you do the same sort of exercise in your own practice, but if I do a black hat, often I'll follow up with, well, great, here's how the challengers stand up to you as the incumbent. Now, let me take a look at your solution and let's compare what you can do, what you can offer versus what they can do. And in that case, that cross connect, that overlap will show, you know what, these are two areas where they have clear strengths that will resonate, that will score well, that you don't have, or you have maybe some weaknesses, perhaps. So that's that opening, right? That's the spear to Achilles' heel or however you want to look at this, that is opening up the avenue for attack where they can be successful because they can show that. Then we go back, if we backpedal though to how the customers are assessing risk, if they go, well, if I switch, these guys mitigate that risk, or they give me ammo to say yes to someone different because they show that not only are they not as risky as maybe a challenger would be, they're giving me value. And that even subtle things like minor changes can win the day. It's really interesting. It doesn't have to be revolutionary. It can be something that's a subtle change that gives me better, maybe lower costs, some slightly better performance, something that gives me the ammo as source selection to say, I'm okay with this. I can justify this change.
Yeah. So I think our next slide does talk a
Yep.
little bit about subtle adjustments.
Right.
And I think you're right. Before you talk about your example here, I think the one misnomer that most competitors have about competing against an incumbent is that they have to come in with this drastically different
Yeah.
or life altering and huge changes to what the current incumbent is doing and performing. And a lot of times it's not. It is maybe sometimes tweaking the staffing, introducing some technologies or some type of a solution to like work more efficiently. Um, and it's not always like about pricing, right? Like I think we've seen that all across the board. We're not talking LPTA type of bids. We're talking best value, fair trade-off type of opportunities. And so that's the reason why you will see, yes, someone won even though they beat the incumbent and they cost more. Well, it's because they showed and were able to demonstrate the best value for the customer. And so again, tweaks and changes, oh so subtle, can really have a major impact. And so we kind of have to look at unseating an incumbent or defending your worth in terms of the little baby steps. It's the subtle things. And I think the end customer, the government in general, they don't like these huge swathing changes, right? You've got to
Right.
justify to someone when you make those changes. And so, help your customers justify why they should give you this contract, why they should you award this contract, and don't make it harder for them by trying to introduce all of these risky type of changes.
Right. And that's, I think, the summation of that whole concept, what you and I think, talked about in grade 2 quite a lot was you got to focus on evolution, not revolution. If you offer something that's a full, complete revolution from what the current contract is, unless the scope has changed radically, don't do it. It's about evolution, a couple of adjustments. Let me tune this thing up. You're doing fine. Your baby's not ugly, but maybe I can give it some better looking clothes. Perhaps I can make your baby a little stronger, a little bit better, a little faster, help your baby grow up and be strong. And this is an example of that, a perfect example of a frankly brilliant takeaway that Amentum did versus BSC Corporation is one example. NAVC, if any of you ever played in NAVC, they are very prescriptive. You do not have a lot of room to maneuver on a NAVC bid. It is what it is. If they ask for a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, you better give them a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and you better be happy about that. So BSC, and they had deep experience in foreign military sales support, decades of it. So they really know how to do it. Amentum came in, and Amentum just tweaked it a bit. Said, listen, I don't think we need all these super SMEs there as a full-time guy. I can make some of them 1099s, and I can keep them interested. I can keep them engaged. I bring them when I need to. I break glass in case of emergency and bring them in to solve a very sticky problem the routine staff can take day-to-day stuff without a problem. And they didn't change anything. They changed the staffing model a little bit. They gave NAVC about a 5% savings. And they scored equally on everything else. All the non-cost scores were identical point for point. DSC cried foul. Well, you can't do that. You'll lose all these people that are valuable. And the NAFC said, no, I'm good. I'm good. They actually proved that they can keep them engaged and interested. I won't lose the expertise, and I save 5% of the contract costs. I'll take that. And Amentum, you won. So Amentum did this evolution, not revolution. Nothing crazy. They simply tuned it up a little bit, and then they took out and they won a $600 million bid by doing that. So not bad, not revolutionary stuff, but it was clever. So let's keep on trucking here and get further into the art of winning, right? This is where we keep going on offense. So let's get more into offense here and embrace that Sun Tzu theme, strike with the least expected, right? So find them. If they expect you to go ahead on attack, how do you go about working around the edges? So let's keep getting into identifying the cracks. So, so Tom, what are your thoughts here, right? How do you go about identifying those cracks?
So, I think it's there's a good saying that I have is that opportunity is lost by most because it's dressed in overall and looks like work. Um, I've got it on a plaque. I love it, and I think it applies to everything that we do. And so I think in this regard, there are cracks and there are performance weaknesses like everywhere. You just have to be able to find them. And when you and I were talking about this slide, like I think my one statement was, "This is hard." I'm not gonna lie. This is full on, art of war. It's really, really hard. But I do have to say that, like in some of these questions that you ask yourself, like, is the incumbent there because the decision maker favors them? Well, maybe the decision makers aren't there anymore. So again, totally changing your strategy on there, right? Is the technology environment shifting? Again, old technology, old solutions, but they're not like reading the room very well. Um, Failure to align your priorities. Again, there's a lot of priority changes. Even on O&M contracts, there's always going to be slight changes. You just have to kind of read them. And if they're not there now, put them in. And so, I think everyone on this call here are pretty experienced. You've seen it. You know what we're talking about when we're talking about like influencing the opportunity and things like that. And so, trying to introduce new changes, new technologies, new solutions, a new way of kind of doing things is really what separates the boys from the men, right? Like this is where you can kind of separate yourself from not winning a contract to winning a contract. And so when we look at like how you win and where some of the cracks are, I kind of want everyone to kind of think about this and embrace your 2-year-old. I know a lot of us are parents here, right? 2-year-olds, God, they are wonderful, but they're so annoying at the same time because they walk around asking why. Well, why? Well, why? And so I don't think that we ask why enough. When you get in a room and you've got these really smart people, everyone's a gray beard and they're briefing their opportunities and we're talking about why we're going to win and why our solution is the best and what our bid strategy is. It's really hard in an open environment like that to ask the elder statesman or the person who knows more than you do the question why. And it's one of those really simple things is that if you can answer a why on a bid strategy, then at least I can hear and you can kind of talk out loud
Right.
what your solution is going to be and have other people either agree or disagree. And it's okay to disagree, people. It's okay to say, well, I don't understand, or have we thought about this? But at least come to the table with a solution or some type of insights instead of just being that, one person who kind of shoots down a strategy or a solution. So again, this super hard to do.
Yeah, you're right. And this is, I think this is why, as you have these and don't have these 80 slide deck bid reviews where you get so bored on your mind that people are mentally numb by slide 3, hearing you drone on about how awesome you are. It should be something that's more structured on a critical thinking exercise, to exactly your point, to challenge the why. And this is where sometimes an outsider like you or I are beneficial because we just don't care. We're focused on how do we win, and whatever you've been doing for 4 years or 40 years, that's cool. But what do I care? Because the the agency environment might have changed. The technology may have changed. The decision makers may have changed. The whole world may be going to a hell in a handbasket may have changed. So the embracing that why, and if someone, to your point, if I ask a question, well, why is this important? Treat me like I'm a slow child. And if I can't get a convincing answer out of them, it makes me wonder, there's just acceptance because it's what we've always done. And that's when you kind of hear the death song in the background. They're going to die if they don't get out of their own damn way. And that's really tough because there's something also, frankly, looking for other evidence. There's so much open source information out there that can show you what might be changing and to use that as ammo to help foster a discussion. Are you aware of this change? Are you aware of this has happened? We see a competitor doing some things that are maybe clever and subtle that are difficult to measure, but it is, you're right. This is hard to question things, especially if you're deeply entrenched. Those folks are at a disadvantage to question themselves because you may be at the risk of saying, you know what, my baby's not as pretty as it used to be. It's gotten a little ugly. We need to find a way to tune it up.
And I think the last point to this too is I think this is where we need to use our ethical stalking and our critical thinking skills,
Mhm.
right? Um, like there's information around us all the time. If anything, we are overly bombarded with information.
True.
But you know, I follow Ronald Reagan, trust but verify, right? Trust that I have like the right information, but verify it somewhere else. And so there are like read between the lines, and, like very subtle type of things that you can see about an incumbent that will show that they may be vulnerable. And so, like one of the things could be, have they made some huge, large, or are like a large number of strategic hires? And if you see these new C suites or new directors of or new VPs and stuff like that, that means that competitor is going to take a swing for something. They're going to take a swing pretty large. And so that kind of starts to lay the groundwork of, if you're monitoring this competitor, you can maybe kind of see, are they going after our bid? Look at their job openings. Like I love looking at like job boards, and there are some idiots out there. And yes, I'm going to be that like honest and like brutal about it. There are some companies out there that don't even modify the job descriptions that make it different from the actual draft scope of work.
Right.
Come on, people. Use AI for good, for God's sake, right? Dump that baby into like ChatGTP or Perplexity and say, hey, rewrite this and give it this spin or give it this tone or whatever. Like, let's don't be lazy. But I will search actual same phrases and find a job listing for that exact contract. And so, oh, now I know exactly which contract you're going to bid for because I've got that draft scope of work in front of me.
Right.
And so again, this is hard, but if you do your research and you kind of really listen and look and read between the lines on things, you can find so much information.
Right. And in the same spirit of getting in front of things is how do we get in front of people that are decision makers? And it's certainly going to be more entertaining. And who are the decision makers now? I mean, as they may be changing, or they might even, am I a decision maker anymore? I'm not sure if I have a job tomorrow. So maybe not. But the shaping around future requirements, which is where this is how, right? We talked about this already a bit with the incumbents being somewhat structurally held back by their current contract and having to be very careful about forward. But if you're the challenger, all bets are off. I mean,
It's
you can
great.
kind of engage as you want to. You have more freedom to maneuver. And yeah, I mean, this is, and frankly, get a hold of these folks and figure out who the decision makers are early. One thing I know you and I chatted about, and this is maybe my data nerddom here, talking a bit geeky on this stuff, is something to understand, because this is one of my things that just drive me absolutely up a wall, where we gotta bid low, and we gotta do okay in the technical, and we'll win. We'll bid low and win that way. Oh my God, give me a break. It's You actually can, if you're methodical about it, you can use your own debriefs and protests to collect data on and measure and actually have some measurable outcomes of how an agency tends to make this. Now, it's not perfect, right? It's like the jigsaw puzzle. I'm gonna start working the edges and zero in more to make sure I can really get a feel for this agency. NAVC. Like I'll tell you, like NAVC is very different of an animal than DISA. They don't operate the same way. So if I'm going to do a bid with NavC, I'm going to shape my solution differently. As I know here's sort of the rules by which they play with. And DISA break. Okay, let's look at them and let's see what resonates with DISA, or can I go for a pricing premium, or do I not? I don't want to touch that tripwire. This is stuff that you can measure. It's tough. It's tough. I
Yeah.
mean, you hit on, I think, using open source information, which is certainly it's near and dear to my heart to find that open source and make use out of it. But it is doable. It is difficult to bring it together, but it is doable. But that's how you can help your pre-positioning if you know the environment you're going to play in, so you can not have a solution that's unrealistically high or premium or just dirt cheap. Because if you go the other end, dirt cheap, 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 you might just seen as like these guys are so insane, they're so risky. There's no way I'm going to award it to them. Absolutely not. So it helps you get a sense about how creative you need to be, or do you need to do like with Momentum? Is let's just tweak things a little bit. Because if I go in crazy, I'm going to lose.
So this is why, and I must be the craziest person on this call or like in GovCon right now, because I think everyone is, very in a very somber kind of mood in GovCon. I'm super excited about this year. And again, maybe I'm a glutton for punishment, but and I'm not normally an optimistic person. I'm a little bit more pragmatic about things, but I think this year is going to be a like such an incredibly interesting year because and it could be the year of the challenger, which again, I'm Asian. I'm a betting woman. I will bet on anything out there. And so I will bet that there are going to be some really unhappy incumbents if they don't wake up and start to kind of embrace the suck that is their environment right now, right? So again, embrace the suck. Yes, it is what it is. Someone's coming for you. The number of contracts might be smaller, there might be more, the contracts might be larger, they might be smaller. You just don't know month to month. And so you really almost have to kind of be prepared for multiple contingency plans. And so the reason why I think that this is the year of the challenger is that challengers sit in a much better position, right? No harm, no foul. They go after something like, yes, they win, great. They lose, okay, they lick their wounds, they move on, they go to something else, right? An incumbent, on the other hand, you've got staff, you've got revenue, you've got a contract to defend, right? You've got your reputation too, right? Like, let's be honest, losing a contract not only sucks financially, but
Yeah.
it sucks also reputation wise, right? Like, oh my God, you got beaten by like a dark horse that you didn't know
Yeah.
that was out there. Like,
That's
that's
the
just really,
God can bleed problem, right? God can bleed. Let's go after him.
yeah,
You're right.
exactly. So,
And I think your point in the if you're an incumbent and you lose, I know I'll speak from experience on that where years ago, as I was a corporate guy before I started FedSavvy, when we saw one of our competitors lose one or two, we started then calling them the wounded zebra. We'd start filling our pipeline full of their recompetes and go, well, maybe they're on the losing streak. So let's go ahead and curb stomp them a few more times and target their bids because perhaps there's some vulnerabilities there we can exploit. I think though your point though about the year of the challenger, you may be right in that. And I know this is maybe a throwback to the podcast you and I did. We talked about Game of Thrones. One of my favorite quotes of Game of Thrones was from Littlefinger is chaos is a ladder. And that's what we have. Chaos is the ladder. So chaos is not necessarily a problem. In fact, it's a ladder you can climb up for opportunity. And he was the most opportunistic character, I think, in the entire show, going from a nobody to the Lord of Harrenhal and all that jazz. Of course, he got stood in the end. So he paid for it later on, but that's okay. Let's forget about that part and think about the journey he went through. So,
so
so
let's,
yeah, go ahead.
no, I was just going to move on to like the next one about how to differentiate yourself.
Right.
Because I think we've kind of talked a little bit about some of these elements.
Yeah, and I think the clever theme here and the differentiation is hard to determine. It really is because I think, at least I'll speak from my experience, is being very focused on doing competitive intelligence work to really study the adversary and then to superimpose them on me. And where do we really stand out? Because I find that teams often go, I've got 10 differentiators, I've got this, I'm so wonderful. Like, no, no, you got maybe three, maybe two, maybe one thing that stands out, but those may be subtle, right? It's the how can I demonstrate that I can make some efficiency gains? But let's say in the incumbent, can I demonstrate that I can noticeably change the efficiency of my contract to be performing better? If I'm the challenger, right? The challenger has to be clever, but not reckless and stupid, where they show I'm going to make some modest improvements. And that's, I think, often the theme that does work unless the scope is really changed, but you do have to be radical then, because then you're going to revolution part. But that's not usually the case. Usually you don't see radical changes from one contract to the next. So it's the how do I leverage some new technology that you understand that fits within your tech stack? How do I show efficiency gains? How do I challenge the status quo? Like Momentum did in that example. It was a brilliant example of let me challenge the status quo of what you think it'll take to retain people. I just proved that I can do it, and I can save you 5%, and I can not impede your effectiveness at all. So these are clever things that are very subtle, but it's not radical by any means.
And I think the optimal word there is being subtle. And I would add to that, the and to being subtle is me too. And so the the thing that I think when you work with a customer and you're talking about their discriminators and what differentiates them and stuff like that, they always propose or say these pie in the sky type of like they think that they're being so radical. They think that they're being so, discriminate. And it's like, no, you need to get out more. Like, no, that's you're really not that special. No, that's kind of, an expectation. And so I think the one thing that is kind of missed on people is that first and foremost, a discriminator doesn't always have to be vastly different or unique from your competitor. And so what I'm trying to say is that sometimes you need to have the me too um, discriminators because you also need to be on par with your competitor, with the incumbent. So if they're doing this, you also need to do this. And if you do this, then maybe you need to do something else a little bit better. So you also kind of have to like one up them on something, but you need to meet them at that same level. And so I think sometimes offers will say, well, we're not going to mention that because they have it too, or it's something that's kind of expected. Well, here's the thing, the evaluators are only going to evaluate what you write, what's in your
Mm.
proposal. You can't assume that they know this. You can't assume that they know this about you. And so, I find it really interesting that all solicitations always have this is that we're only going to evaluate what is in the, what's in the proposal.
Right.
Don't assume that we know all of this. That kind of goes without saying. But really, it needs to be in there. And you need to kind of drive that home to your proposal team and to your writers and your evaluators internally in that you need to have that in there. It needs to be explicitly written in there. You have to call that out. Otherwise, you're not going to get any credit for it. And so it's the Me Too differentiators and discriminators that also need to kind of be in there, in addition to the other, maybe more subtle type of discriminators that make you a little bit more like that purple unicorn.
Yeah. And if I had a dollar for every protest I read or any bit I was involved with where they said, well, we did the same thing. Well, maybe you did. Maybe you had the same solution, but the other guy explained it more thoroughly. They explained the how it's going to work and the exactly why do you care. And the others did the same thing. And to your point, they took it for granted that, well, didn't it was obvious. Nothing is obvious. Nothing is obvious. You have to explain it to them. If you have to write it in crayon and use pop-up books to explain something explicitly, that's the key because what might not really be a differentiator, to your point, part of the differentiation is how well you can explain why do you care and how am I going to do this? Because if you can show that level of clarity of thought, that will score beautifully. If you
Yeah.
don't, then yes, you put it in there. You say, oh, I've checked the box. Well, guess what? They may have checked the box and they may have rolled out a whole other series of things they could demonstrate to the customer that they know what they're talking about. So just don't check the box. That mentality is terrible and guaranteed you will lose. So don't do that. Well, I know we're running low on time here. We don't want to curtail any questions people have. So this is what we've got, right? So we went through this kind of a wrap up here, talking about who the incumbent is, what their advantages are, the weak spots that they have. I think we had a lot of fun looking at the playbook of how to beat them. So let's get into some questions, folks. I'm sure there's some questions people may have. So
Yeah.
let's go ahead and open that line up, and
Maybe
we
we
can stay
maybe
after
we
school, I
could
think, for a
get
little bit if we need
people,
to.
maybe we could get people to like come back on camera and we'll stop sharing. And like, I love this to kind of like be interactive,
Sure,
but I think we do have one question here
sure. Let's
from
go.
Jill. Jill, did you want to go ahead and present your question or?
Hello, I'm Jill. Basically, Brian, you were going into some depth, I think, about looking into protests, but I got a little lost in the explanation about
Sure.
how to track an agency's evaluation practices or biases. Would love it if you could recap that again.
Yeah, it's something. It's a technique that I've been using now for a number of years because I've just am a big nerd. So I'll go through and really the short version is if you read a protest decision carefully enough, you can begin to get some insight into the actual evaluation process itself. And it's painful, right? No one sits there and reads protests because they're entertaining or fun, and they're not exactly easy reading. Well, maybe Tana is, but she's built differently. But I'll read them. I'll read several at a stretch, and then I want to like put an ice pick on my eye. But I still learn a lot from them. But the key thing is, we can talk about this offline too, is as you read it, and the more fluent you get in reading these things, it begins to make more sense, right? So what I would suggest, and this is something we actually do at FedSavvy Strategies, is to go through a series of protests and begin to look at, is there a trend here? Is there a measurable trend of what tends to score as a strength? What tends to create a weakness for the bidder? What is the level of, let's say, the gap between the pricing versus the non-cost evaluation? How big of a gap does it take between one competitor and another one to get a pricing premium? Or can you? Is there any hope to getting a pricing premium? That's going to vary. And what I also would say is this is why, hint, hint, you should all get debriefs, win or lose. I don't care if you win, I don't care if you lose. Ask for a damn debrief because that helps inform you more. If you start collecting that, you actually be surprised. I know some really rock star CI professionals do the same thing where they will create really detailed analyses of, well, now that I know my debriefs, I've got this, I have a better picture about how an agency tends to operate. It takes some time to get used to doing that, and it is painful, but the work pays off. So I hope that gives you a little more clarity.
So I would like to add to that, Jill, but I'm going to go reverse in what Brian just said is from the debrief perspective, always get a debrief. And
yes.
so one of the things, and that's just like industry best practice, especially when you win, right? Everybody wants to know why they lost. But here's the thing, people will assume why they won. And they do that based on the score, right? Like if you're being scored by like these sub factors and you scored excellent or good or whatever, and like you scored better than your competitors. Well, sometimes you kind of win despite yourself, but you really kind of want to know what was it that resonated with the customer. And so when you ask for a debrief, when you win, you will actually understand, was it my management? Was it our hybrid PMO style that we, like that we introduced? Was it because of this technology or the solution of this methodology? And so you get a lot of like what really works. And then now you've got that information, you can go back and repeat that into like your next one instead of trying to constantly rebid things that don't work. But you just think, oh, well, we used it in this bid and we won, so it must be great, even though the customer never said that was the reason why it was great. But the thing that I love about bid protest and which is slightly different from what Brian had said, is that I like to look at bid protest from certain companies, because certain companies will protest more often than others, right? And so if you're going after a company and they've got a ton of protest, you can
Yep.
really be able to kind of read into like their mental psyche about what they have issues with. And so some customer, like some, contractors, um, will think, oh, well, it's not fair, like we want to evaluate it fairly. Well, now you're like, oh, well, they've got this whole prima donna kind of like, you need to be treated special kind of, like mentality. Or was it they didn't interpret or they didn't read the solicitation properly, and so they assume certain things. And so, that kind of gives you a little bit more of a mindset in your competitor as to what types of bids they're like, what type of protests they're issuing, and whether or not they were sustained or not, on where their vulnerabilities are. And so again, it's war, right? You're trying to find where can you push that one thorn in their side to find their Achilles heel or their weakness. And a lot of times you can read them if you're looking and reading between the lines on those protests. And that's the reason why I love protests so much.
Yeah, and actually to build on that, no, it is something that I agree is a great source of information used in protests under competition. And it was interesting. You can see, you can begin to learn about how well they tend to score. There may be some aspects about whatever the work they're pursuing that they tend to do well in. That they really do tend to, these guys typically on management, they tend to score very well. They know how to do with staffing and transition plan, whatever that is. So that's a strength of theirs. So I need to expect that about them. And also, I find it interesting to build on what Tom you're saying, and I agree with you 100% on all those points. You're absolutely right. Is it can also be a way to debunk myths about competitors. Like, for example, Accenture. Oh, they're super expensive. No, they're not. They often compete and they win at a lower price point than who they compete against. Now, they may get lots of post-award contract awards that change the price in the end, but the winning part is the first point, right? It's a winner's problem. They often go in lower than their competition, like wildly lower. So it's that these myths that we hold ourselves true, like that's a true, it's like folklore, it's tribal knowledge, is often complete nonsense. And those can help refute tribal knowledge and showing this is the real truth. So it is a treasure trove. It is something that block your calendar off, maybe prepare a stiff drink as you read these things, because they can be a little dry, but they can be. And Tom's points are all 100% right. There's such a treasure trove of information. You should, if you're not using it, you're leaving money on the table.
So I think we're up against time, but there's
Yep.
another question here about what are examples of tells that the customer isn't so into the incumbent anymore?
Oh
And
boy.
so I like, oh my God, we do not have enough time for this question. And so I think that needs to be like a part two, kind of like the tells that they're really not into you, right? Is that there's so many obvious ones. One being, uh, your key person no longer, like your key person now needs to have a certain certification that they don't currently hold. I love
Yep.
that one. It's like I actually worked on a bid where like key PM has to have like a PMP and a CSSP and all this other stuff, and they're like, our current PM has none of this. I'm like, okay, so maybe they're not that into you, right?
Yeah. Or the LCATs radically shift from, like, I worked on one that was like they had the key personnel were all PhD scientists. And they went from, you must have a PhD, 20 years experience in this very specific branch of science. Then they changed it to master's degree at 8 years. Uh-oh. Game over. Wah, wah. They're not that into you, and you're about to get crushed because there's no way if you bid your incumbent personnel, you can be competitive at
Oh,
all.
and here's an obvious one, is that the largest task that you're working on is no longer part of the new scope of work. So again,
Yes,
maybe they're not really that into you. That your whole like reason for existence is no longer part of the scope of work.
right. Well, good stuff. I know we're out of time here, but we're always happy to chat after class or offline. So let me hand it back to Meg, and Meg's wondering when these guys can just shut up.
No, I would love to do a part two. I think that's really it opens up a whole other conversation in terms of how to tell when they're kind of being ousted a little bit. So really interesting stuff. Thank you so much to everyone for joining. I really appreciate your participation. Thank you for being here. We do very much value your feedback and would love to know what you want to know more about. So you will be receiving a survey to your inbox. In that email is also a link to the PDF of the slides, as well as a handout that summarizes the content that you got here. So if you have any questions, if you have any technical difficulties with the links, anything like that, of course, please feel free to reach out to us. The websites for both Entellect and FedSavvy Strategies are also linked in that email. So you can always use those links to contact us, reach out, ask the questions that you didn't get to ask today. And please give us that feedback in that survey. If there's something that you're wondering about, if there's another subject matter that we can hit on, please let us know. We're looking for starting some conversations here, knowing that we are in a very different time in terms of GovCon. So we want to have these conversations. We want you to be involved. So thank you so much for coming. We appreciate you attending the webinar, and we look forward to all of your feedback and future conversations.